That night, a terrible storm swept through Oma's village. While everyone hid indoors, Oma heard a knock at her door. When she opened it, she found a strange man standing in the rain, barefoot, muddy, and completely soaked. "Please, I need help," he said. Oma stared at him. "Who are you?" The man hesitated. "Kalu, that's all I remember." Something about him felt strange, but Oma could not leave him outside. "Come in before the rain carries you away." Kalu stepped inside. Then the lantern suddenly flickered. A long howl came from the forest. Kalu froze. Oma looked at him. "You know that sound?" He slowly shook his head, but his frightened eyes told her a very different story. Morning came, and the storm had passed like it was never there. Oma stepped into her courtyard to find Kalu already awake, sitting stiffly on a low stool, staring at his own hands as if they belonged to someone else. "You didn't sleep?" she asked. "I did," Kalu said. "I just don't remember dreaming. Only running." Oma raised an eyebrow. "Running from what?" Kalu opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I don't know." She studied him for a long moment, then decided to let it go, for now. She handed him a bowl of warm pepper soup instead. "Eat first. Mysteries can wait." Kalu took one spoonful and made a face so dramatic that Oma laughed out loud for the first time in weeks. "Too much pepper?" she teased. "No," he said, eyes watering, reaching for water. "Too much life." For a moment he almost seemed ordinary. Then a stray dog wandered into the courtyard and froze, growling low at Kalu, hackles raised, before bolting away as if it had seen something no dog should see. Kalu's smile faded fast. Oma noticed. Ordinary men didn't make dogs run. Days passed, and Kalu began to settle into the rhythm of the household, fetching water, repairing a broken fence, helping wherever he could to repay Oma's kindness. But it was the fence that gave him away. A heavy fallen log had blocked the compound's back path since before the storm. Two of Oma's strongest workmen had failed to move it that morning, grunting and sweating for nothing. Kalu walked over, studied it for a moment, and lifted it alone, like it weighed nothing more than a basket of yams. The workmen stared. Oma, watching from the veranda, nearly dropped her cup. "Kalu," she called carefully. "How did you do that?" He looked down at his own arms, just as surprised as everyone else. "I don't know." It felt light. "Men do not lift trees, Kalu. Maybe I used to be a farmer," he offered with a nervous half-smile. "Farmers don't lift trees," Oma said flatly. "Bulls do." One of the workmen mumbled something about spirits under his breath, and quickly found a reason to be elsewhere. That night, Oma sat by her window long after the house had gone quiet, watching Kalu pace restlessly in the courtyard below, muttering to himself words she almost recognized in a language she'd never heard. Whoever Kalu was before the storm, he was not just a man who had lost his memory. He was a man hiding from something far bigger than himself. The next morning, Oma decided to take Kalu to the village market, partly to see if familiar faces might jog his memory, partly because she couldn't stop watching him and told herself it was concern, not curiosity. The market was loud and colorful, full of life. Kalu seemed delighted by simple things, the smell of roasting corn, the noise of haggling traders, a child chasing a chicken through the crowd. For a while he laughed easily, and Oma found herself smiling more than she meant to. Then they passed an old woman selling herbs at the edge of the market. The moment her eyes landed on Kalu, her hands froze over her basket. She rose slowly, staring at him the way one stares at a ghost. "You," she whispered. "You should not be walking among us." Kalu blinked, confused. "Do you know me, mother?" The old woman did not answer his question. Instead, she turned to Oma, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "Send him away, my daughter," she said, voice trembling, "before the forest comes looking for what belongs to it." Then she gathered her basket and hurried off without another word, leaving both of them standing in stunned silence as the market noise swirled on around them, indifferent. Oma turned slowly to Kalu. "The forest," she repeated. "What does she mean, the forest?" Kalu's face had gone pale. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but my hands are shaking, and I don't know why." That night, the silence in Oma's compound was broken by a sharp cry from the courtyard. Oma rushed out to find Kalu clutching his arm, a gash cut deep from a fall against the sharpened edge of a broken clay pot. "Sit still," she ordered, fetching cloth and water, expecting the worst. But when she wiped the wound clean to bandage it, she stopped. There was blood, but the cut beneath it was already closing, the skin knitting itself together like invisible hands were stitching it shut. Oma stared, cloth frozen in her hand. "Kalu, look at your arm." He looked down and went very still. "That's not possible," he whispered. "No," Oma said slowly. "It's not?" Kalu pulled his arm back, cradling it like it had betrayed him. "Oma, I think there is something wrong with me, or something different," she said carefully, though her voice shook more than she wanted it to. He looked at her, searching her face for fear. He didn't find it, not fully. Just a woman trying very hard to stay calm, in front of a man who healed like it was nothing. "You're not afraid of me," he said, almost disbelieving. "I didn't say that," Oma answered. "I said I'm not running. There's a difference." Outside, far off in the trees, a hyena's laugh rippled through the night air, closer than it had ever been before. Kalu's head snapped toward the sound, every muscle in his body suddenly rigid. Something out there knew exactly where he was. 3 nights later, the moon rose full and heavy over the village. Kalu grew restless the moment it appeared, pacing, sweating, refusing to meet Oma's eyes. "You should lock your door tonight," he said quietly. "Why?" Oma asked. "Because I don't trust myself," he admitted. "Not tonight." She didn't lock the door. Instead, she sat outside his room until dawn, listening to him groan in pain behind the wall, and heard, just once, a sound that was not quite human. By morning, Kalu emerged pale and exhausted, but himself again. "I didn't hurt you," he said, relieved when he saw her still there. "No," Oma said softly. "But I think I finally understand what the old woman meant." Days after the full moon, an old hunter passed through the village, resting briefly at the market before continuing his journey. He saw Kalu from a distance and stopped cold, his walking stick nearly slipping from his hand. "Addi's boy," he murmured almost to himself. "So it's true. You're still alive." Kalu approached, heart pounding. "You know my mother?" The hunter's eyes widened with recognition and pity. "Not Kalu," he said slowly. "Your name was never Kalu." Before he could say more, a distant howl rolled through the hills, and the hunter flinched, grabbing his stick like a weapon. "Not here," he whispered. "Not where they can hear us." He turned and walked briskly away, leaving Kalu standing frozen in the road, Oma's hand steady on his arm. That evening, Oma sent a message asking the hunter to return, offering food and safety in exchange for answers. He came back at dusk, refusing to sit, refusing tea, his eyes darting to the tree line every few seconds. "I'll tell you what I know," he said, "but only once. And then I'm gone." Kalu leaned forward, every muscle tense. "Please, your mother's name was Addi's," the hunter began. "She was no ordinary woman. She belonged to the hyena clan, spirits who wear human skin when it suits them." Oma's breath caught, but she said nothing, letting him continue. "She broke their oldest law," the hunter said. "She loved a human man. And when you were born, half of one world and half of another, the clan called it an abomination." Kalu's hands trembled in his lap. "She hid you," the hunter finished quietly. "Moved you from village to village, wiping your memory each time to keep the clan from finding you. It cost her everything." The hunter left before the moon rose, refusing to say another word, refusing even to look back. Kalu sat motionless long after he'd gone, the name Ez turning over and over in his mind like a stone he couldn't put down. "Ez," Oma said softly, testing the sound of it. "It suits you, does it?" Kalu asked. "I don't know that man. I only know the one who fetches your water and burns his tongue on your pepper soup." Oma allowed herself a small smile, then grew serious. "Whoever you were born as doesn't erase who you've become, but it explains why the forest never stops watching me," Kalu said quietly. Above them, clouds gathered fast and unnatural, swallowing the stars one by one, as though something ancient had just noticed him again. In the weeks that followed, small signs began creeping into the edges of ordinary life. Chickens vanished from their coops without a trace. A goat was found trembling in the bush, too terrified to make a sound. Hunters spoke of strange tracks near the forest's edge, paw prints too large, walking in a line too straight for any normal animal. Oma noticed Kalu growing quieter with each report, watching the tree line longer than necessary, listening to sounds she couldn't hear. "They're getting closer, aren't they?" she said one evening, not really a question. "Yes," Kalu admitted. "Then we prepare," Oma said simply, already turning toward the house to fetch a lantern. Kalu caught her wrist gently. "Oma, if this goes badly, I need you far from me, not beside me." That, Oma said, pulling her wrist free with a small, stubborn smile, was never going to happen. Despite the tension creeping into their days, laughter still found its way into the compound. One afternoon, Kalu attempted to help with the cooking, insisting he remembered how, only to nearly set the kitchen roof on fire with an overzealous cooking fire. Oma dragged him out by his collar, coughing through the smoke, equal parts furious and delighted. "Some hunter's instinct," she teased, fanning smoke from her face. "In my defense," Kalu said, smudged with soot, "nothing in my memory warned me that yam flour explodes." "It doesn't explode, Kalu. You just don't know how to cook." For a moment, surrounded by smoke and laughter, the looming danger outside the walls felt very far away. That night, watching him sleep peacefully for the first time in days, Oma allowed herself to admit something she'd been avoiding. Whatever Kalu was, spirit or man or something in between, she was no longer simply protecting a stranger. She was falling for him. A few days later, a stranger arrived at the market, tall, sharp-eyed, moving with unnatural grace through the crowd. He asked casual questions about a man who'd appeared during the great storm, offering coins for information, smiling in a way that never quite reached his eyes. Word reached Oma quickly through her steward, who'd grown fiercely protective of the household, despite his early suspicions. "He's not from any village nearby," the steward warned. "And madam, forgive me, but his eyes." They caught the lantern light strangely. Oma's blood ran cold. She found Kalu immediately, relaying every detail. Kalu's jaw tightened. "A scout," he said. "They're not attacking yet. They're just making sure it's really me." "And when they're sure?" Oma asked. Kalu didn't answer, and his silence was answer enough. That night, Kalu insisted on walking the compound's perimeter alone, refusing Oma's company despite her protests. Near the fence line, he found them. 3 sets of paw prints pressed deep into the mud, far too large, circling the property like a slow, deliberate warning. He crouched low, studying the tracks, and felt something old and instinctive stir inside him, a recognition his mind didn't have words for, but his body understood completely. A twig snapped behind him. Kalu spun, fists raised, only to find Oma standing there, lantern trembling slightly in her grip. "I told you to stay inside," he said, exhaling hard. "And I told you that was never going to happen," Oma reminded him, though her voice betrayed her fear as she stared at the massive prints in the mud. The following morning, whispers had begun moving through the village like smoke. A stranger asking questions, strange tracks near Oma's compound, an unnatural howling some claimed to have heard closer than ever before. Superstition took hold quickly. A few villagers who once smiled at Kalu now crossed the street to avoid him. Even Oma's own cousin, visiting from a neighboring village, pulled her aside with worry etched into her face. "People are saying he brings the forest's curse with him," she warned. "You should send him away before it touches your name too, Oma." Oma's spine straightened. "Let them talk. I know what kind of man shares my table and mends my fences." "That's exactly what worries me," her cousin said quietly. "You've stopped seeing the danger because you've fallen for the man wearing it." That night, unable to sleep, Kalu found Oma sitting alone on the veranda, staring out at the darkened tree line. "Your cousin is right, you know," he said quietly, sitting beside her. "I am dangerous. Maybe I should leave before it costs you everything." "Don't you dare," Oma said, turning to him sharply. "I did not survive one difficult marriage just to be told what I can and cannot choose for myself." Kalu fell silent, surprised by the fire in her voice. "You didn't choose this life," Oma continued, softer now. "None of us choose where we start. But I've watched you choose kindness, patience, and courage every single day since that storm. That is the man I know. Not whatever waits for you in the forest." Kalu reached for her hand, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything else, the silence between them warmer than any words could be. 3 nights later, the tension finally broke. A scream cut through the darkness. One of Oma's goats dragged screaming into the tree line by something too fast and too strong to be an ordinary predator. Kalu bolted from the house instantly, disappearing into the darkness before Oma could stop him. She grabbed a lantern and followed anyway, ignoring every warning he'd ever given her, heart hammering as she pushed through the underbrush. Deep in the trees, she found him standing over the goat's remains, breathing hard, eyes glowing faint amber in the moonlight. The first time she'd seen him look less than fully human. "Kalu," she whispered, and he turned to her slowly, something wild and ancient still lingering behind his eyes. "Run," he said, voice layered strangely. "Please, while you still can." Oma didn't run. She stood her ground, lantern raised, staring into eyes that were both Kalu's and something older, something wilder. "No," she said, voice shaking but firm. "I've run from enough things in my life. I won't run from you." Something in her steadiness seemed to reach him. The amber glow in his eyes flickered, dimmed, and slowly, painfully, Kalu's human features settled back into place. He sank to his knees in the mud, breathing hard, hands trembling. "I almost—" "You didn't," Oma said, kneeling beside him despite the blood and the darkness. "You stopped yourself." "That matters, does it?" Kalu asked bitterly. "The clan doesn't care what I almost do. Only what I am." Behind them, deep in the trees, low laughter rippled through the darkness, patient and amused, as though something had been watching the entire exchange. They didn't sleep that night, sitting together by lantern light as Kalu finally spoke the fear he'd been carrying since the hunter's visit. "They won't stop coming," he said. "Not until I return or until I'm dead. Those are the only two outcomes the clan accepts. Then we find a third," Oma said simply. Kalu almost laughed despite everything. "You say that like it's easy." "I didn't say it was easy," Oma replied. "I said we'd find it. There's a difference." She reached for his hand, mud-streaked and trembling, and held it firmly in both of hers. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "you are not facing this alone anymore. I hope you finally understood that." For the first time since the storm had carried him into her life, Kalu allowed himself to believe her. The following week, Odom, elder of the HYENA clan, finally revealed himself, not skulking in the shadows, but walking boldly into the village at dusk in human form, tall and imposing, eyes carrying an unsettling stillness. He requested an audience with the woman sheltering Adizi's son, his voice carrying easily despite its softness. Against Kalu's fierce objections, Oma agreed to meet him alone in her courtyard, refusing to let fear dictate her choices. "You're braver than most humans who've stood before me," Odom observed, circling her slowly. "Or perhaps simply more foolish. Perhaps I'm just tired of men deciding what I should fear," Oma replied evenly. Odom's lips curved into something almost like respect. "Adi's son chose well," he said. "Pity it won't save him." Odom's warning was simple and absolute. Kalu had until the next full moon to return to the clan willingly, or they would come and take him by force, destroying anything and anyone who stood in their way. "Your mother's debt has waited long enough," Odom said, turning to leave. "Do not test our patience further." When Oma relayed the ultimatum, Kalu's face went pale with a fear she hadn't seen in him before, not for himself but for her and everyone in the compound. "If I go to them," he said quietly, "everyone here stays safe. And if you don't?" Oma asked, though she already knew the answer. "Then they burn this place to the ground looking for me," Kalu said. "I've seen what the clan does to those who shelter their enemies." That night, for the first time, Kalu began quietly planning to leave without saying goodbye. Oma noticed the change in him instantly. The careful way he began saying things that sounded too much like farewells, the long looks lingering a moment too long. She confronted him directly, refusing to let him slip away in silence. "You're planning to leave," she said. "Don't insult me by denying it." Kalu's silence confirmed everything. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself alone," Oma said fiercely. "Not after everything we've survived together. This isn't your fight, Oma." Kalu snapped, frustration and fear breaking through his usual calm. "It became my fight the moment I let you inside during that storm," Oma shot back, unflinching. "You don't get to protect me by disappearing. That's not protection. That's abandonment wearing a noble mask." Kalu stared at her, stunned into silence by the truth in her words, the fight slowly draining out of him. "Then help me think of something better," he finally said, voice breaking slightly. "Because I don't know how to save you both." Together they returned to the old hunter, hoping he knew of some loophole buried in clan law that could spare Kalu's life. The hunter listened grimly, then finally spoke of something he'd hoped never to repeat. "There's an old custom," he said slowly. "A challenge. Any clan member may contest a judgment before the full pack, if they can prove their human ties make them stronger, not weaker." "Prove it how?" Kalu asked. "By facing Odom directly," the hunter said. "Not to the death, to submission. It's rarely survived, but it exists." Oma's stomach turned, but Kalu's eyes had already sharpened with new resolve. "Then that's what I'll do," he said. Preparing for the challenge consumed their remaining days before the full moon, the hunter reluctantly agreeing to guide. Kalu, through half-remembered training passed down from his own dealings with the clan years before. Kalu pushed himself relentlessly, learning to call his shifted form on command, instead of letting fear or fury trigger it. Oma watched from the sidelines, torn between pride and terror, unable to look away, even when the sight of him mid-transformation still sent a chill through her. One evening, exhausted and sore, Kalu collapsed beside her, human again, breathing hard. "Tell me the truth," he said. "Do I still look like a man to you, after everything you've seen?" Oma took his face in her hands gently. "You look like the man who fixed my fence and burned my kitchen down trying to impress me. Nothing about that has changed." Word of Kalu's intention to challenge Odom spread quickly through the compound, and to Oma's quiet surprise the very villagers who once feared him began offering support instead. The steward brought protective herbs gathered from the forest's edge. Neighbors who'd crossed the street to avoid Kalu now left offerings of food and blessings at Oma's gate. Even her cousin returned, contrite, pressing a small protective charm into Oma's palm. "I was wrong to doubt what you saw in him," she admitted. "Fight for him, Oma, the way he's clearly fighting for all of us." Oma held the charm tightly, overwhelmed by a community rallying around a man they'd once called cursed. That night she pressed the charm into Kalu's palm before he could refuse it. "This isn't just my fight anymore," she told him. "It's ours." The night before the full moon, Kalu and Oma sat together in comfortable silence, the weight of tomorrow settling heavily around them. "If I don't come back," Kalu began carefully. "You will," Oma interrupted firmly. "Let me finish," he said gently. "If I don't come back, I need you to know that whatever life I had before that storm doesn't matter anymore. You gave me the only life worth remembering." Oma's eyes filled despite her best efforts to stay strong. "Then come back and tell me that again tomorrow." "I'm not interested in last words, Kalu. I want many, many more ordinary ones." He pulled her close, and for a while neither of them spoke at all, simply holding on to the quiet, before the storm that was still to come. The full moon rose heavy and silver over the forest, clearing where the clan had gathered. Dozens of hyena spirits shifting restlessly between forms, eyes glinting with anticipation. Odom stood waiting at the center, unimpressed as Kalu stepped into the clearing alone, Oma watching helplessly from the tree line despite his pleas for her to stay home. "You came," Odom said, almost surprised. "Foolish but admirable." "I invoke the challenge," Kalu said, voice steady despite his racing heart. "Let the pack witness." Murmurs rippled through the gathered clan, ancient and hungry, as Odom's expression shifted into something sharper, more focused. "Very well," Odom said, shifting fully into his true form. "Let's see what Adi's blood is truly worth." The clearing erupted into chaos as Odom lunged, faster and more powerful than anything Kalu had trained against, sending him crashing into the dirt within seconds. The gathered clan howled with approval, circling closer, hungry for the outcome they expected. Kalu rose, blood at his lip, and forced himself to remember everything the hunter had taught him. Not to fight fear, but to fight alongside it. He shifted fully for the first time by choice rather than instinct. Power flooding through him, controlled and purposeful instead of wild and desperate. Odom paused, genuine surprise flickering across his features. "Interesting," he said. "Perhaps there's more of your mother in you than I assumed." The battle resumed, faster now, both combatants matching each other blow for blow beneath the indifferent silver moon. Oma watched from the tree line, hands clenched so tightly her nails cut into her palms, every instinct screaming at her to intervene, despite knowing she couldn't. The fight raged on, brutal and breathtaking, until Odom finally pinned Kalu to the ground, claws poised at his throat, the clearing falling utterly silent. "Yield," Odom commanded. and I will let you live quietly, forgotten, far from here." Kalu, battered and exhausted, managed a broken laugh. "I already tried living forgotten," he said. "I'd rather die remembered by someone who mattered." Something shifted in Odum's expression, old grief surfacing beneath ancient authority. "Your mother said almost the exact same thing," he said quietly, "the night she chose to protect you instead of herself." Odum rose slowly, releasing Kalu, the clearing holding its collective breath. "A daze didn't break our law out of weakness," Odum said, addressing the gathered clan as much as Kalu. "She broke it because she believed love could exist between our worlds without destroying either one." He looked down at Kalu with something almost like respect. "You've spent this fight proving her right, whether you intended to or not." Murmurs of uncertainty rippled through the clan, decades of tradition wavering under the weight of the moment. "The debt," Odum announced finally, "is paid. Not through blood, but through proof. Let it be known among us that Adi's son chose to fight for his human life, and won that right honestly." Kalu, stunned and disbelieving, could only stare as the clan began retreating quietly into the surrounding trees. Oma broke from the tree line the moment the clearing emptied, running to Kalu's side, checking his wounds with trembling, frantic hands. "You're insufferable," she said, half sobbing, half laughing with relief. "Absolutely reckless and insufferable. But alive," Kalu managed weakly, pulling her into an exhausted embrace despite his injuries. "Barely," Oma said, though she held him tighter than she ever had before. Above them, the clouds finally parted fully, moonlight settling calm and silver over the clearing instead of ominous, as though even the sky recognized that something had shifted permanently for the better. "Let's go home," Kalu whispered against her hair. "Home," Oma repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." In the weeks that followed, Kalu's wounds healed slowly, human and otherwise, while the village that once feared him began treating him as one of their own. Children who once ran from him now begged him for stories of the storm that brought him to their village. The old herb woman who'd once warned Oma away brought a basket of gifts instead, murmuring an apology neither of them needed spoken aloud. Even the steward, once his fiercest skeptic, had taken to calling him young master with unmistakable fondness. One evening, sitting together on the veranda where it had all somehow begun, Kalu turned to Oma with a question he'd clearly been holding on to for days. "Marry me?" he said simply. "Not because a storm brought us together, but because I choose every single day since to stay." Oma stared at him for a long moment, joy and disbelief warring across her face before finally settling into a wide, unguarded smile. "Ask me properly," she said, crossing her arms with mock sternness. "None of this half-hearted veranda talk." Kalu laughed, rising to kneel before her despite the ache still lingering in his bones, taking her hand in both of his. "Oma," he said, voice steady and sure, "you took in a stranger during a storm, and somehow gave him back a life worth living. I don't know everything about who I was before you, but I know exactly who I want to be beside you. Marry me." Oma pulled him up into her arms, instead of answering right away, holding him close as her answer. "Yes," she finally whispered against his shoulder. "Of course, yes." Their wedding took place beneath the same trees where the clan had once gathered to judge him, the village transforming the clearing into a place of celebration instead of fear. The old hunter attended, quietly proud, presenting them with a small carved token that had once belonged to Adaze herself. "She would have loved this," he told Kalu, pressing the token into his palm. "A son who chose love exactly as she once did." Even distant rustling at the tree line during the ceremony no longer inspired fear, villagers murmuring instead that perhaps the forest itself had come to bless the union. Oma, dressed in deep wine and gold, and Kalu, in deep teal threaded with silver, exchanged vows beneath a sky finally, fully clear. Years later, travelers passing through the village would still hear the story told around evening fires, embellished slightly more with each retelling, though the heart of it always remained the same. They spoke of a wealthy widow who opened her door to a stranger during the fiercest storm anyone could remember, never once suspecting the storm itself had been searching for a safe place to leave him. They spoke of a man who learned that the family we choose can outweigh the family we're born into, and that courage sometimes looks like an ordinary woman refusing to run. Children in the village grew up believing that love, real love, doesn't ask you to be less than what you are. It simply asks you to stay. True belonging isn't about hiding what makes you different. It's about finding the people brave enough to stand beside you, storm and all. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more unforgettable tales like this one. And tell me in the comments, if a stranger showed up at your door during a storm, would you have let him in?